How's everyone doing this morning? Good. All right. I'm going to be messing with this thing the whole time because it does not fit my ear for some reason, but we're going to try to tuck it right there and see what happens. We are in week 2 of this faithful series, but I want to start with this, with believe. Imagine if believing really made a huge difference, just in anything in life. We believe, that eating healthy will make you healthy, right? We believe that. We believe that there's healthier foods, there's non-healthy foods. We have that belief, and if we just leave it at that, nothing happens. Believing that does nothing to you physically whatsoever. Like if you believe in good finances, you believe that if you're financially responsible and that you save money and that you pay off your debts and stuff like that, that should be good. But you just left it at belief. You did nothing about it. Nothing changes. If you believe that a healthy marriage is based on trust and relationship and spending time and investing and doing those things, but you leave it at belief and you do nothing, nothing changes. And it's not lack of knowledge. We can know. We can know these things. You can read finance books. We can read marriage help books. We can read every single diet book there is. And you can have that knowledge deep in your brain. And if we leave it at that, if we believe it to be true, and we know what to do, and we stop at that, worthless, absolutely worthless. Because we have to do. We have to do. Doing is what makes a difference. Jesus knew this. Jesus taught this. If you look at how he taught, it was not just simply believing, but there was an action step. There was a requirement from those believers. In fact, I was writing out parts of this message and trying to get things down, and I found myself going between using the words believers and followers when referring to this, and we'll get to that in a little bit, but Jesus taught in such a way that it requires something of us. Like I said, today we're in part 2 of this Faithful series. This is a series that originated out of North Point. They have awesome graphics in the video that you've seen right there and put stuff together to keep it in place while we are in also week 2 of Rob's sabbatical. He's out taking some time to refresh and renew spiritually after serving for so long, but he will be back soon, and that'll be great. Jesus taught us to do, and if you look through it, there was an invitation that he would give to people when he taught. If you look through the New Testament, his early church, and all the way through right now, it was an invitation to follow me. Follow me was the invitation that Jesus would give. And follow me requires, it's relational, it's active, it's interactive. You need to go and do something. You have to move from where you're at and go to where Jesus is going. But over the years, we've reduced it down, and we've invented a brand new, 100% less active way of faith. It's called just believe in me. This is what we've kind of reduced it to, that Jesus just now only invites to believe. It's easier, it's safer, it's less demanding, and it leaves you exactly where you are with no change required. This is what we've kind of got to, and we've fallen in the trap. I've fallen in the trap over time. And I want to move away from that this morning. I get back to the heart of it and how Jesus invited people to live life that reflects their confidence and their trust in him, something that builds faith. This series is about that very thing of building faith, and I know as someone who grew up in church and has been in church my entire life, I've seen it over the years. I've seen people who have a strong faith. And you see it and you want to model that. You ask them, well, what's the secrets? And so there are different things that they will tell you, different ingredients. And if we want this, strong faith, like imagine what we could do. What we could do if we were confident that God was with us. What would you do if you were confident that God was with you at all times? Years ago, when I was younger and dumber, we were at the beach, and they had this opportunity to go bungee jumping. And I am afraid of heights. But I was trying to impress a girl, so I was like, I'm going to do this. And so I went and signed up to go up to this tower to go bungee jumping. And, they strapped the vest on me, and they put the thing on my back. And at that point, I had full confidence in this minimum wage employee, that I was going to be able to jump and not fall to my death, right? And I did. I jumped, and then as I was falling through the air, I'm like, is this thing going to catch me? And it did. I'm still, spoiler alert, I'm here. But I think about that same thing in life, is that there are times that we kind of have that mentality of like, what if God was with me? What if I could really trust him and I could move out and do something that I wouldn't normally do, except if I know that he's got a hold of me, it's going to give me the faith to do it. How do I get to that point? And that's what this series tackles in these ways of what fuels and facilitates that development of an active, enduring faith. I believe that we all want that. If you're here today, you have an interest in the beliefs and the customs of Christianity, you're here for a reason. And we are on some point of this path towards this. And so we're talking about this for the next, we started last week. It's a 6-week series on what are the essential ingredients, what can we put into our lives that will gain that confidence in God. And this is a series that we've done in 12-1 over the years. It gets repackaged. Pastor Rob has done this over the years. It's the 5 faith catalysts. There's a book on this. This is something that they put together at North Point years ago when they talked to a lot of people, and they said, what is it that you've experienced that has grown your faith? And the first part this week is one of those 5. Practical teaching. Practical teaching. And this is not just hearing, but putting into practice. And this is the way that Jesus taught. Like, if you look through the words of Jesus, the teachings of Jesus, and the way that he presented it, it was very practical. It required something. It's tough. And we're talking about that because practical teaching is huge towards growing faith. It's huge in development. When our active faith intersects with God's faithfulness, our faith grows. If you've been a believer, you've seen this over the time that you take that step of faith, God meets you there, you come out the other side, and you have that boldness to continue on, and the trust starts to grow. Just like anything, it starts with some steps. And as trust builds, your faith grows. And just like in a physical relationship and a spiritual relationship with God, it's the same thing, that trust is the currency. I believe Kathy said that last week. And I want to get into the heart of the truth of what Jesus taught. Before, I want to preface this because I apologize for the water breaks. Just cut those from YouTube if you can edit them out afterwards. It's not going to happen. Oh yeah, hey YouTube people, I forgot to acknowledge them, but there's a couple or 3, I don't know, they're on there. Jesus gives a Sermon on the Mount. It's his longest teaching that we catch in the Gospels. It's Matthew chapter 5, going through 7. If you haven't read it, it's great. It's a great place to start if you're still trying to figure out, if you're holding that Bible and like, there's so much here, where can I begin? Here's a great spot to get some practical teaching from Jesus. And he goes through a whole lot of things to do. You know, he talks about being the salt of the earth, being light. This is where you find about turning the other cheek. This is where you get to forgiving your enemies. When someone asks you for something, don't just do the minimum, but give them more. If they take from you, give them more. This is where you don't just go and ask God for forgiveness, but you forgive others before that, because it's based on that. It's where Jesus teaches us not to judge others, because with that judgment comes our judgment upon ourselves. A long teaching that he gets into, and then he kind of caps it off. And this is a very challenging teaching. Anyone in here you can read through and you'll find things that still, it's tough to do. I've been a believer a very, very long time, and I still read through there when it's talking about loving your enemies, and I'm just like, oh no. Loving them, that's tough. It's tough. Jesus requires a lot in those teachings. But he gives us this at the end. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine, not remembers, believes, don't even have to agree, and puts them into practice. We've heard it. Now we actually act on it, and we do it. That person's like a wise man This is someone who can connect the dots between what they're doing and the results of those actions. That's what wisdom really does for you. You gain it over the years when you see the results of what you're doing. And just like, hey, that wise man knows what he does has results. The wise man who built his house, who's established his life, he's put his whole livelihood on the rock. And I've never built a house. I don't know anyone here who's ever actually physically built a house. Maybe you've had a house built, and we trust. Yeah, that's Kelly. I knew Kelly would be the guy. We usually trust builders to do that stuff for us, right? Like, I don't have to worry about that. But back then, this was an analogy they kind of knew because they were part of the house building process, and they understood what it meant to build on a rock. And building on a rock, I would imagine a little bit more difficult than sand. I have dug through sand, and I've tried to dig through rock. I was successful on one of those ventures, right? Like, it's tough. Rock is hard. I don't know if you knew that. But Jesus is in there saying, this is what it's like, is that you actually build on the rock, and these people kind of understood that, right? Like, okay, I get what you're going right here. Like, that's you have to find that. Takes a little bit more effort, and then you got to dig down and put that sweat in there. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew, and they beat against that house. Yet it did not fall because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice, that's like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. I know we just sang about firm foundation. I don't know if Ed even knew that we were doing this today, so that was pretty cool. This is implication right now because some of you are hearing this and you're a believer. You would say, if someone asked you to define yourself, you'd say, hey, I'm a believer. I go to church. I read the Bible. Pastor says things, and when he says those things, I say, I agree with those things. I even say amen sometimes. But what can happen is that we can have all those beliefs. We can take those beliefs and not put them into practice. And then when something comes along in life, when the winds and the storms come and something bad happens, we built our belief on just sitting back and just watching God do something and not doing something ourselves. And then everything gets shattered and it starts to wash away. We suddenly have a crisis of faith because we didn't put it into practice. We didn't grow it. We didn't develop it. We left it on that sand, and that foundation of sand has washed away. And the rock wasn't there. Believing can be deceiving. Believing can be deceiving. I had a conversation with someone one time who was not a believer. They were an atheist, and they had left the faith. They'd been in church, and they had left and became an atheist, and their reasoning has stuck with me ever since they've said this to me. They said, I was sitting there one day, and I'd sang the songs, and I'd heard the messages. But I looked around the room, and I wondered if anyone actually believed it. Because in my experience around them, I didn't feel it to be true. And I don't know what church that was that they were at. But I know I've grown up in church, and I've been around it before, that I've questioned it myself. Do they really believe? Do they really believe it? If we don't live out what we say, do we believe it? Believing can be deceiving. We can believe something, we can keep it inside, it makes us feel good, but until it comes out into the light of day, until it gets put in action, it's not really worth anything. James, Jesus' brother, he put it this way. He said, do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says. Do what it says. He goes on and gives this mirror illustration. He talks about it's kind of like, hopefully most of us looked in the mirror this morning. You get up and you look to see what's going on before you head out. And then you make the adjustments you need, like the few extra gray hairs that you're trying to pluck out of your beard until you don't have one left, or whatever it may be that you have to do to fix it before you head out. You still got the black bean in your tooth from where you had that. And you make those adjustments before you head out in the day, but it seems like, sometimes if we don't look in that mirror, We don't see those things. And other people, you wonder, like, do they look in the mirror, do they see it, and then they just ignore it and go on with their lives and not do anything? Like, is that what they're doing? And that's what he's talking about right here when he's talking about looking to the law, is that it gives us reflection. It shows us what should be corrected, and then we should actually do those things. That's the active part of your faith, is this reflection on how does this change me? How does it affect me? What can I do with it? Whoever looks intently into the perfect law that gives freedom and continues in it, not forgetting what they've heard, but actually doing it, they will be blessed in what they do. This is active. This is doing it. Jesus was talking about the rain came down, the streams rose, the winds blew and beat against the house, yet it did not fall because it had its foundation on the rock. This is where you live it out everywhere you go. I've over the years tackled this because we talk in church about the will of God. And some people are like, I want to know what God's will for my life is. And I was like, look, I'm going to tell you this right here, is that you don't be trying to sit there and seek out some huge arching thing of like what career or what life you're going to go into right now. But understand that God's will is going to happen today at lunch or tomorrow in a conversation. There's going to be a moment for you to show Jesus to someone, and it's God's will that you do that at that time, that you act and that you do, and that you practice the faith that you believe. I forgot where I was at. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. This is listening, believing, and not doing. Not doing. And then you blame God or conclude there is no God because although they believed, their faith was feeble, frail, and fragile. I know that there's two sides to this right now. Some of you guys are new believers. You're still filling this out. You're trying to figure this Christianity thing out, and this is a great place to start, putting in practical teaching. But there's another side to this, that there's some in here, you've gotten complacent, or you've started to feel that. You've felt the shifting sands of things. You haven't put it into practice. You want to be more active in your faith. I liken it to this because I'm not one of the types that follows the instructions when I get like that IKEA furniture. You know, the things comes with all the parts and the different pieces. And I'm like, all right, it's A. I'll start with A, and like, let's put it together and see if we can figure it out. And I'm successful half the time. No, Allison just shook her head, not half. I'm successful sometimes, right? But then every once in a while, I have some leftover parts, or the table's just really wobbly, and I'm like, let's look at the instructions. And I look at the instruction, I'm like, we have to take it apart and start over, right? We need to actually build it the right way. We actually need to do what I should have done from the beginning, which is actually take what was told to me and follow the steps and put it into practice instead of just seeing if I could wing this myself. And I think that this is key for some, that maybe you feel like your faith is frail, it's fragile, that if a storm came that you wouldn't survive it. Or maybe you're trying to rebuild after one, and you're just going to do the same mistakes before. You're just going to try to build it upon an inactive belief. When Jesus finished teaching this, when Jesus had finished saying these things, the crowds were amazed at his teaching, because he had taught as one who had authority and not as their teachers of the law. This is that switch flipped for some of them right there, because they're like, man, we've just been told what to believe. You told us what to do. I like that. I like that. There's this quote from Lane Jones, and I don't know who Lane Jones is, all right? I got this from us right here, but it's unapplied truth is like unapplied paint. It doesn't do anybody any good. The value is in the application. I've often used this analogy when I'm talking about the idea of belief spurring action, is that, Over the years when I worked at NC State, we would do these fire drills things. The alarm would go off, and it happened so often. And every time it was the exact same thing. I had to walk into a room and tell people, you have to leave the room, right? And they would just be like, look, it's just a drill. It's not a problem. It's all right. But then one day there was some smoke in the building, and someone smelled smoke, and that thing went off. And man, did that room empty in a hurry. Because suddenly they believed. They believed what they heard. They heard something, they're like, oh, I believe that I should get out of this room right now. It's crazy how when you truly believe something and then put it into practice, that action can have results. I'm on my last page. Oh no, we went way too quick. I had so much, and I was like, let's go through this a little bit quicker, but that's all right. I'm not going to prolong this for the sake of prolonging it, but I do have a few more points. I actually asked my wife if we had any of these items that I buy over the years, because when I was putting this together and I was thinking about the best way to explain this idea of faith in practice, one of the first things that came to mind is I have a tendency to be one of those suckers who can be sold to. I don't know if that's some of you in here are those people. My wife is not. My wife's like, we don't need it, no matter what it is, right? She can't. She's nothing as seen on TV is in our house because she's never been that type of person. Me, however, I'm the type that I would watch those infomercials and be like, oh my goodness, that's going to change my life. I need that, and I need it now, you know? And I wouldn't bite off. I'd never call those numbers, whatever, but at some point you'd walk through Walmart and it'd be like as seen on TV, and you're like, there it is, and you'd buy the slap chop, and then it would sit in our kitchen somewhere, you know, like it would start on the counter, would end in a cabinet, and then at one point I would be like, oh my goodness, I'm going to use the juicer. And I'd ask my wife, I'd be like, where's the juicer? I can't seem to find it. And she'd be like, I gave it to Goodwill 3 years ago. That's where it's at, if you want it again. But I feel like that is really kind of what happens a lot, is that some of you've heard a message presentation, you've had that moment of, man, you believed it, and you felt the selling moment, right? Whether it be like an altar call or whatever it may be, that you kind of got to the point you're like, oh, this can change my life. This Christianity, they can change my life. Jesus is going to come in my life. It's going to change my life. And then we get it and we hold on to it. And that moment of first buying it is amazing, but then it just kind of sits inactive for a while. And it's just sitting there. And then we kind of put it away. And then at some point when something happens and we want to break it out and we want to use it, we find that faith is kind of deteriorated, or our wife gave it to Goodwill. We find out that it's not there. I believe that faith is kind of like a muscle. And just like atrophy, if you don't use it, if you don't sit there and develop it, if you don't grow it over time, it will fade away. I do wonder what it would be like if the church was not just a body of believers. If that wasn't how we referred to ourselves or how people referred to us, but if we were a followers of Jesus. And that difference between believing and following. If we were known for our actions, if we were the salt of the earth, if we were actually out there being light into darkness, what that would look like. What it would look like if we didn't just tell people what we believe, but we actually believed what we believed to the fact that it changed our actions and how we live our lives. I don't know if you've ever gone on a fad diet or heard someone tell you about a fad diet. Several of you right now, just by numbers in here, you are doing something, whether it be paleo or keto or you're a carnivore or you're vegan or whatever it is, you've got some sort of diet that you tried last week or you just started, you're just putting into practice, right? Maybe you failed at all of them. Like, I've known the people who've told me they're on a different diet every other month. They tell me, they're like, hey, I'm doing the paleo, I'm doing keto, you know. And they'll tell you about it. And if you are one of those people, don't talk about it. No one wants to hear about your diet, right? It's annoying. Separate message right there, but please don't have that conversation with people. They don't care. But I'll tell you what people do care about is you ever seen someone walk in and they look different? You can tell that they've dropped the weight. They just look full of energy, and then you want to ask them, what are you doing different? What have you done? What has changed about you? Now I want to hear about your diet. Now I want you to tell me about it because I've seen the results of what it will do to your life. And that's the disconnect. If we can move from just sitting there and trying to tell people about our beliefs, but actually living out our beliefs and to the point that people see them and ask us about it, being that light in darkness, being that change for the world, it can make all the difference. Following Jesus will make your life better and it'll make you better at life. I've stood by this principle that it's not just spiritual. If you're not a believer, look at the teachings of Jesus, and there's a lot of it that it's not just about being spiritual. It's just smart ways of living your life. This is your creator, your maker, and knows your purpose and what's best for you. Following Jesus. I looked back after doing this and looked back at this idea of building our lives on the foundation of what Jesus taught. I looked back at those things that he had just taught in Matthew 5 and Matthew 6. Started thinking about what are practical ways? What can we do? When I would do 12-1 messages, I'd always have a point of do this. We do the message, and I want to teach it, and we do the life, but then there was an application point. So it'd pop up and say, do this, and it would have a couple bullet points on this is how you take what we just heard, what we just learned, and you put it into practice. You change starting tomorrow and this week, and you do it, and you'll see the results. And I had a list, but my notes wouldn't print, but I'm going to tell you what they were is because I went back and started looking at what Jesus taught in that Sermon on the Mount. You know, he starts with the whole blessed are the peacemakers, those who mourn, moves into being the salt of the earth, that shining light on the hill, being light in the darkness. He goes into a point, he talks about prayer, like a prayer life that's not just for show and it's not just when other people are watching, but a private prayer life where it's just you and God. Fasting when no one's looking. This spiritual disciplines that you would kind of put into your life when no one else is around to build character. He talks about the way we deal with those annoying and frustrating people in our lives. We interact with people all the time, and it's very easy just to follow the habits of what the world tells us to do, that, you know, if someone smacks you, you smack them back. And Jesus taught a different way, that you turn the other cheek, that you forgive those, that you don't judge. And so, let's not just hear messages and take them in and add them to our beliefs. You may believe everything I've said today, but if we just leave it at that, it's completely worthless. Put it into practice. And I don't know what that means for you. Maybe it means that there's someone that you've been holding on to unforgiveness, that you need to forgive them. Or you need to break down with your pride and go and ask for forgiveness. Maybe you've thought that your job in this life was to be God's judge to the world and walk around and tell people they're sinners. I don't know. Whatever it is that you need to change about the way that you practice your faith, to take those beliefs of what Jesus taught and put them into action, it will grow your faith. It will grow you stronger. It will move you through it, and it'll make you better at life. Let's pray. God, we come before you today. Lord, we thank you for this opportunity we have to come to this place and to discuss these things. God, I pray right now for everyone in this room. God, we won't just be hearers, we'll be doers. God, help us to have the conviction, the strength, the faith to actually put into practice the things you've taught. God, thank you for what you're doing in our lives, God, but continue changing us and making us more like you. Transform us by your love. God, so that the world can see not us, but they can see you working through us. God, thank you. In Jesus' name, amen.